North Yorkshire County Council approved the Strategic Plan for SEND education provision on the 4th of September 2018, following a period of formal and informal consultation. Currently, the high needs budget of £44.8 million is allocated to SEND education in North Yorkshire County Council. As part of the strategic plan, we are looking to reshape and improve local provision within that £44.8 million high needs budget. As part of that reshape and improvement process, we are now consulting on 3 changes to the high needs block, and that's what we'd like to talk to you about today. The 3 changes are as follows. The first proposal is around changing the process for top-up funding for children and young people with education, health and care plans. This is moving from a computer resource allocation system to a banding system, and we'll describe this more in Proposal 1. In Proposal 2, we're looking to change the way provision for secondary age pupils who are permanently excluded or at risk of permanent exclusion, and we're looking at how that is commissioned and funded in North Yorkshire. And for Proposal 3, we're looking at the provision and funding for young people with education, health and care plans in post-16 education, and we want to bring that funding for that education in line with statutory guidance. So Proposal 1 is around changes to the method used to allocate top-up funding for pupils with education, health and care plans. For children who have education, health and care plans, each individual child needs to be allocated a specific amount of money to meet their individual needs. This money comes from the high needs budget and is called Element 3 or top-up funding. At the moment, we use a computer system called the Can-Do to allocate this funding. SENCOs or parents can answer a series of questions, and at the end of it, an individual amount is allocated to the child's needs. Parents, carers and schools have expressed concerns about how the Can-Do works. It can be quite difficult to complete and to fill in. People aren't always sure what the question is and how they should answer it. And at the moment, there is a disparity between what children are paid. For example, we could have 2 children with very similar set of needs who receive a different amount in different parts of the county, depending on how the questions in the Can-Do are answered. So what we would like to do is to introduce a system that gives a clear amount, regardless of where the child is in the county or who completes the resource allocation system. We propose to replace the computer Can-Do system with a banded system. Banded systems to allocate top-up funding are widely used across the country. The aim of using a banding system is to achieve the following benefits. We want to be sure that the system covers all areas of need. So whether your primary need is around cognition and learning, social, emotional, mental health, communication and interaction, or sensory, physical, medical needs, we need to be sure that the system can provide a top-up for all of those primary needs. It needs to be easier to administer, both in the schools for the SENCOs who might be filling it in, for parents who need to understand and be able to complete it, and in the back office for us as we're trying to allocate the resource properly. At the moment, schools and parents answer their questions individually and don't have to back that up with evidence of what the child needs or the provision that is being made. We want to make sure we have the evidence so that we can prove to parents that the provision identified in the Education, Health and Care Plan is the provision that they receive. Each band will have a set of descriptors attached to it, so everybody can see exactly how the funding is allocated, so the principles are clear and equitable across the county. We hope that all of these things will make the replacement for the Can-Do easier to understand. We also would like the new system to be used across the continuum, so whether the child is in mainstream school, a targeted or an enhanced provision, or in specialist provision, and whether they're in early years or up to the age of 25, the banded system would cover all of their needs. So the banding system we propose to use consists of 10 bands from 1 to 10. Each band has a set of descriptors which can be applied to different primary areas of need. They can also be used for a combination of needs to make sure we accurately match the description to the child's education, health and care plan. So to do this, we would look at the education, health and care plan, we would look at the child's needs and the provision, and we would match that to the closest band with descriptions that match the child's EHCP. As the child's needs change, we can review their EHCP against the descriptors to see whether the band needs to be changed. Each band from Band 4 to Band 10 has an identified top-up amount allocated to it. Bands 1 to 3 do not have an allocated top-up amount. This is because for children in schools there is an element of money that is allocated known as Element 2. That funding is delegated to the school for them to support children with lower levels of special educational need. Schools tell us sometimes it's hard to know whether a child needs an EHCP or whether their needs can be met at SEND support level, and the descriptors in bands 1 to 3 will help schools to realise where they can provide support at that SEND support level. The table you can see on the screen now demonstrates the funding we propose to allocate to each band. As you will see, bands 1 to 3 have no specific top-up amount attached, but they're increasing levels of needs which should be able to be met at SEND support level within the school, and the descriptors will advise the school of the kind of interventions and support that they should be able to provide. You'll also see that at Band 10 there is an approximate value of £20,000 attached. This is because Band 10 is for the group of young people whose needs are so complex and unique that they can't be matched to a specific description, as you would find with bands 1 to 9. For those young people in Band 10, and in North Yorkshire we anticipate that will be 25 to 30 young people, we will allocate the specific amount they need by a panel. The panel will consist of parents and of head teachers, as well as members from the local authority, and we would look at the child's individual needs to decide exactly how much money they require. In order to decide how much money is allocated to each band, we've compared the support needed to a number of teaching assistant hours. This doesn't mean that only teaching assistant hours will be provided, it's just to give us a standard equivalent for all of the bands. For some children, it will be teaching assistant hours. For others, it could be a particular intervention they require or a piece of equipment. There are no savings attached to this proposal. Our aim is to ensure that the local authority has the right information to make sure each child or young person has the right provision to meet their needs. The proposed banding system will also ensure that funding for each child or young person is spent as stated in their EHCP. The local authority is committed to making sure that each child has sufficient funding to meet the needs as identified in the Education, Health and Care Plan. Proposal 2 is around looking at the way we will change provision for secondary age pupils who are permanently excluded or at risk of permanent exclusion. We're looking at how these services are commissioned and funded in North Yorkshire. Currently, provision for young people at risk of being or who have been permanently excluded is delivered by pupil referral services and alternative provisions in North Yorkshire. Across the country, sometimes pupil referral services are referred to as pupil referral unit or PRUs, and that's a term that you may be familiar with. Alternative provision is where a young person can't access education in their local mainstream school and needs a different or bespoke package. In North Yorkshire, we have 7 provisions that cover these young people. They're at Craven Pupil Referral Service, at Sunbeck, which covers Hambleton and Richmondshire, at the Grove Academy, which covers Harrogate, Knaresborough and Ripon, at Scarborough PRS, and at the Rubicon Centre in Selby. We also have 2 alternative provisions, Rydale Out of School Education, or ROOS, and Whitby Outreach. PRS and alternative provisions meet the needs of children and young people who might need support to prevent them being excluded from school, and also for those who have been permanently excluded. At the moment, they also support young people with medical needs, both within the centres themselves, so young people can actually attend the PRS centres, or on an outreach basis where tuition is sent out from the PRS or from the alternative provision. In the strategic plan, we propose the following changes which would affect the local authority commissioned alternative provision. We wanted to strengthen the partnerships between schools and their local alternative provision to support those at risk of exclusion and to try to reduce the number of exclusions across the county. The local authority has a duty to provide education for those young people who are permanently excluded from the 6th day of their exclusion. So we wanted to commission a set number of places in alternative provision that would be available to those young people who have been excluded, but also we wanted to have some flexible places so that those at risk of exclusion who might just need a short piece of work or some intensive additional support could access those places and hopefully return to their mainstream school. We wanted to develop a new model of provision for young people with medical needs. Parents and carers told us variably that the provision had worked for them and also that in some cases it really hadn't. So we wanted to look at that separately. For some parents, they felt that the name Pupil Referral Service wasn't a great name and wasn't very positive, and they wanted us to look at a different name for the PRS, and that's been brought forward as part of this proposal. The current funding arrangements. Pupil Referral Service and alternative provisions are currently funded with £4.6 million of the high needs block. This is made up of £1.9 million of statutory funding for those permanently excluded young people who, from the 6th day, the local authority has a responsibility to ensure they have education. The other £2.7 million is non-statutory funding, or what we call in North Yorkshire discretionary funding. This was designed to be used for the preventative work and to support those young people at risk of exclusion. On top of that £4.6 million, there is additional funding from the provision for students who have medical needs. In 2017 and 2018, there were 110 places commissioned for young people at risk of exclusion or who had been permanently excluded, and there were 109 permanent exclusions. So all of those places, bar one, were used within the year. So the changes being proposed. The budget of alternative provision commissioned by the local authority will be purely place-based at a rate of £17,000 per place. This is very similar to our special schools, who are commissioned at around the same amount, and is also very similar to other pupil referral services across the country. We'd like to increase the number of places being commissioned to between 130 and 142 places. This will hopefully give us the added flexibility we're looking for in terms of those young people who are at risk of exclusion but haven't yet been excluded. These places then, these 130 to 142 places, will be used to meet our statutory 6-day requirements, but also flexibly in partnership with local schools to avoid exclusion. We intend to put £771,000 of the non-statutory or discretionary funding to local area steering groups so that they can support decision making and how they would like to use the flexible places that will be available to them. They will also look at how they can tackle the local challenges in terms of exclusions, in terms of attendance, and in terms of support for those young people who may be finding the classroom environment difficult. Dependent upon the number of places, a reduction in spend of 1.3 to 1.5 million is expected. The local authority will continue to invest between 3.1 million and 3.3 million in supporting those at risk of exclusion through our alternative provisions and our local partnerships. In 2019 to 2020, North Yorkshire County Council will continue to commission 28 places at £10,000 per place within our existing alternative provision for in-reach medical provision. Alongside that, we will be doing a separate piece of work and we'll be bringing forward new proposals in terms of how we look to support our young people with medical needs. North Yorkshire County Council have commissioned an independent organisation, ISOS, to support us in developing and reshaping the alternative provision system in North Yorkshire. These workshops are ongoing and involve the existing alternative provision and PRS staff and also head teachers and other staff from community schools in each area. Proposal 3 is around post-16 education for young people with an education, health and care plan. Funding for statutory school-age pupils between 5 and 16 is all based on them being in school for 25 hours a week. In post-16 education, government guidance states we expect that full-time study programmes for 16 and 17-year-olds will be 600 planned hours per academic year, and we set the funding rate on this basis. Currently, any young person with or without an education, health and care plan who attends a mainstream sixth form or a further education provision will receive 600 hours per year or about 16 hours a week of direct teaching. Young people with an EHCP receive a top-up amount from the high needs budget, and this funds their additional support as we described in Proposal 1. The funding between 5 and 16 in the CAN-DO is allocated to cover 25 hours of support and teaching in school. For young people who currently attend further education colleges and who have an EHCP, they attend for 16 hours of teaching a week, and the local authority provides them with 16/25 of the top-up funding allocated. So they are given an amount of funding that relates to the amount of teaching hours they receive. For young people with EHCPs who are in mainstream sixth forms attached to schools, They attend for 16 hours of teaching a week, but they're currently overfunded by their local authority in that we give them 25 hours worth of their top-up funding. So we propose to pay school sixth forms 16/25 of the top-up funding to bring that in line with the teaching the student actually receives. This applies to 33 sixth form students this academic year and will save around £50,000 to the high needs budget. There'll be no impact on the education of these sixth form students as their education is already 16 hours per week. We would just be paying for exactly what they receive. This proposal does not relate to students in special school sixth forms. Moving on to the second part of this proposal is around young people in post-19 provision. The Code of Practice for Special Educational Needs and Disabilities states that where young people have EHC plans, local authorities should consider the need to provide a full package of provision and support across education, health and care that covers 5 days a week where that is appropriate to meet the young person's needs. 5-day packages of provision and support do not have to be at one provider and could involve amounts of times at different providers and in different settings. It may include periods outside education institutions with appropriate support, including time and support for independent study. The local authority remains committed that for those young people who require 5-day packages, these are provided. As young people turn 18, they become subject to adult legislation such as the Care Act. Both the Care Act and the Children and Families Act refer to the duty to ensure a seamless transition from children's services into adult services, and that appropriate planning and coordination should take place as part of that transition. Currently, parents and carers tell us that this transition is not as smooth as it could be. They describe a cliff edge where they don't know exactly what a package might look like once education ceases. In terms of effective preparation for adulthood support, right through secondary school and probably into primary school, education programs should support the young person in terms of health, employment, independence, and access to the community. As the young person approaches post-16, this should result in an effective transition plan with clearly articulated next steps and outcomes. Within the local authority, both adult social care, who sit as part of health and adult services, and inclusion services are aware that this transition is not as seamless as it could be. There's a transitions project taking place looking at improving and developing the transition from children's services into adult services. As part of this, adult social care accept the principle that the education component of any package would consist of 16 hours a week or 600 hours per academic year, or approximately 3 days per week. So for those young people who require a 5-day package, that package will continue, but there will be a clearly articulated and funded care or health element for the additional 2 days. The local authority expects this to ensure a smooth transition where young people and their parents and carers understand the education outcomes to be achieved from the 3 days of the education package, but also understand the care outcomes and provision that will be achieved during the other 2 days, and will understand what the transition is into adulthood and what that package will look like when education ceases. This proposal applies to young people in the following environments. Young people attending the Personalised Learning Programme, which is part of our Adult Learning and Skills Service. Young people in specialist post-19 independent provision or other independent learning providers. And also young people attending supported internships. Supported internships are 25-hour programmes, including work placement. So there's a component of education and a component of work placement. We're looking with the Department of Work and Pensions about how they can fund the work element of this for the additional 9 hours. We will ensure that students on supported internships retain their 25 hours a week funding, whether that money is paid for from the Department of Work and Pensions or whether it continues to be from the Education High Needs block. Our proposal then is that for young people in those post-19 provisions that I mentioned, from September 2019, education would pay 16/25 of their top-up, or if it's a specialist placement where there is a one single fee, we would pay 3/5 of that total provision cost. Education outcomes will be clearly stated in the Education Health and Care Plan in terms of the progressive course of study that the young person is on and the education outcomes to be achieved. The remaining 2 days for those students who require 5-day packages will continue to be funded by the local authority, but will be clearly stated care provision with an emphasis on care outcomes such as self-care, independence, lifelong learning, access and engagement within the community, and quality of life. We anticipate that for the academic year from September 2019, approximately 41 students will be in these post-19 5-day packages. At the moment, those 41 students would cost almost £1 million to the high needs budget. If we change to their 5-day package being 600 hours of education, with a package from Health and Adult Services, this would be a spending reduction of almost £350,000 to the high needs block. In doing this, we will make sure that the high needs block funds education for students with an education, health and care plan as intended, and that care needs are met by care funding and care provision with clearly articulated care outcomes. There is unlikely to be an overall saving to the local authority, but we will ensure that funding is spent in the appropriate way and that outcomes are clearly articulated for each young person in these post-19 provisions. This proposal does not apply to young people in post-16 education in special schools. The high needs budget will continue to fund 25 hours of top-up. For any young person with a currently agreed 5-day package, there will be no change to their package, only the funding source will change for 2/5 of it. Going forward, we would like to see that new 5-day packages will be developed in conjunction with the young person, with their parent and carer, with the SEND team staff, and with adult social care staff. This will ease transition and provide holistic and effective education and care packages for those young people who require them, and will provide clarity on what the expectation is of provision as they move into adulthood. The local authority would like to receive as many responses to this consultation as possible. The consultation is open from the 5th of October to the 11th of November 2018. We would really encourage you to complete the online survey, which can be found at www.northyorks.gov.uk/changes-high-needs-budget. Paper copies of the documents are available, and you can call us on 01609 780 780 or email us customer.services@northyorks.gov.uk. Every single response will be read, and every comment or question or suggestion will be responded to in the final document. So I do encourage you to please pass on your responses to us. We will take everything into consideration.